My name is Shawn Brigman, founder of Salishan Sturgeon Canoes. My dedication to this Plateau canoe recovery arts practice has had a visible and positive impact on regional tribal communities. The recent awakening of spirit around water, river, and salmon, and even sturgeon, has included a return to canoe culture on the ancestral waters of Washington, Idaho, British Columbia, and Montana. For 5 consecutive years before the 2020 pandemic hit, I have been honored with the opportunity to sculpt my contemporary Salishan Sturgeon canoe interpretation several times while demonstrating my assemblage method established in 2013 in multiple tribal communities. I started off my undergraduate degree in architecture, and then I went on to a master's degree in recreation management. And then I finished my doctoral studies at Gonzaga University in leadership studies. For undergraduate degree, I did study abroad in Copenhagen, Denmark for Denmark's international study program. And during that time, I had an opportunity to study Scandinavian architecture. What I saw is just the subtle refinements, the subtle curvature like in their Viking ship heritage, and that would translate over into their furniture design and some of their full-scale architectural design. There was just subtlety and some of the curvature and form line that I'm attracted to. So I saw the connection between like Scandinavian culture, and then back home we have like a Plateau cultural heritage. And so I just see that kind of parallel that when I came back home, I really wanted to celebrate that complexity about our culture back home here in Eastern Washington. Part of my architectural and arts recovery process, it's all about doing ethnographic research, doing historical photo research, and then also having elder presence where you speak with elders and have them be present. And then through that process, there are some communities who put on workshops. For example, the Wanapum tribe is historically known for keeping their tule mat lodge housing culture alive. And so I attended a workshop such as that to learn about tule mat lodges. So they did, basically the Kalispel tribe has done open workshops. For example, Francis Kaluuya of the Kalispel tribe invited me up for a Western white pine bark harvest workshop. And that was back in 2012. And so that was very helpful in my journey, especially with bark sturgeon-nosed canoe. That workshop was very instrumental in learning about the materials of the canoes. During my 10-year process, I discovered in the ethnography that there's ancestral tools that our ancestors used to make these canoes. And one of them, one example would be when you're harvesting Western white pine bark. When I did my first harvest, I used a plastic spatula from Walmart, of all places, and used that plastic spatula to help separate that bark from the log. But then I discovered in an ethnography report that they made special tools to do that, either out of an elk rib bone or a deer antler that has that curved shape. And that tool allows you to kind of form to the shape of the log to help carve that bark off. That's my next journey, is to start using the ancestral tools. So I just finished my 10th season in bark sturgeon-nosed canoe sculpting. And I also finished my 9th year in the Salishan Sturgeon-nosed canoe method, which is a method I developed in 2013. And that means that this has got a unique frame assemblage and skin attachment method that's unique to me, whereas the bark canoes are since time immemorial. But this canoe here is since 2013, Shawn Brigman. When I started bark sturgeon-nosed canoe making in 2012, I couldn't find the bark to skin that canoe because our forests are depleted of all that Western white pine. So I knew early on I needed to find a contemporary method, and so that's why I developed this Salishan Sturgeon-nosed canoe, and that was in 2013. I've noticed a lot of the boat cultures from North America and into Canada are using the ballistic nylon as an interpretation. So whether it's their umiak or whether it's whatever their canoe form, this is a good experimental material to stretch onto their canoe frame. So that would include the kayak makers, some of the boat makers. And so I figured, well, why don't I give that a try with ballistic nylon? However, with ballistic nylon, if you try to put this ballistic nylon on a bark sturgeon-nosed canoe, this will just crush the frame of a traditional canoe. So I actually had to redesign and retrofit the frame to accommodate the ballistic nylon. It's like a drum. When you put animal rawhide on a drum and it dries, the rawhide shrinks and it'll crush the frame. So they've over-engineered the drum frame to accommodate it. Well, same thing with this. I had to basically design the frame to now accommodate the ballistic nylon. So for example, on a bark sturgeon-nosed canoe, the only thing that's holding the frame together is what's called bitter cherry bark lashings and cedar root lashings. Those are not strong enough to prevent the ballistic nylon from crushing the frame. So we had to substitute in new materials and redesign the wood frame to accommodate that ballistic nylon. So on this canoe right here, my contemporary Salishan Sturgeon canoe, the only thing that's actually traditional on it is the ribs. I could have went out and bought bamboo stock or white oak stock and steam bent it into ribs, but I chose to just stick with the traditional ribs, which would be Rocky Mountain maple. So that's actually the only thing that's traditional on this canoe is the Rocky Mountain maple ribs. This canoe is actually built to my dimensions. So I did my rib spacing based on my hand dimension like this. The whole reason I recovered bark sturgeon-nosed canoe is so that the next generation of youth can start to abstract it into furniture design, abstract it into house design or sculptural design or even jewelry design. I've taken it and abstracted it into glassware. Someday I would like to maybe do furniture design. But where I see it going into the future, that's up to the next generation of youth to abstract that into something new. Whatever that art discipline is, that's up to them. As a Plateau-specific cultural form, the bark sturgeon-nosed canoe represents the marriage patterns, food gathering patterns, indigenous ways of knowing and being, and even a sturgeon fish, important as a traditional food. The bow and stern of the historical canoe relates to the shape of the nose of a sturgeon, for perhaps it was the fish that once inspired the shape and design. When I think of strengthening our communities, I think of the ancestral village sites along the rivers and lakes. I think of the architectural heritage, the frameworks like canoe frames, housing frames, and how all village frameworks are connected. My arts practice passes on the traditional lifeways of Plateau tribal communities by physically demonstrating that these artistic implements are not to be celebrated as static relics of the past, but as a contemporary continuity with the present and future as a living art and architectural heritage.